Hi guys, I'm Maylin Dovan, certified athletic therapist and founder of Rehab-U Movement and Performance Therapy. I want to talk to you about the overused and misused dumbbell rotator cuff exercise. I literally cringe when I see that kind of exercise being done in the gym. Not that I have anything against rotator cuff exercise. Specifically, when you've had a shoulder injury, if you've had a shoulder joint injury, a subluxation, a dislocation, just a strain, the rotator cuff muscles will actually be inhibited. So it's important to activate them, and rotator cuff exercises do help to reactivate the rotator cuff muscles. However, if we're talking about strengthening the rotator cuff, this really isn't the type of exercise that we would use to strengthen the rotator cuff. That being said, there are variations of that exercise that are better for both activation purposes and for both strengthening purposes. And then a slew of other exercises that you can use that are more functional for the rotator cuff. The actual function of the rotator cuff is not really to create that super range of motion external rotation. It's more to keep the head of the humerus in the glenoid cavity for shoulder movement. So the rotator cuff is a stabilization role, okay? Again, that said, there are better options than the one you saw back here for rotator cuff activation and strengthening. One of the main exercises that I do like to use if I'm working into that rotation pattern and if I do want to isolate that external rotation pattern is to do it, first of all, using a band, and second of all, using only the eccentric portion of the lift. So we know that eccentrics and control are really important. The second thing that's important whenever we're doing a rotator cuff exercise is to have the scapula stable. So the one thing we could see with the exercises that Michael was doing before is that people let the scapula move as they go into internal and external rotation. The scapula is the origin of the rotator cuff muscles, and they insert onto the head of the humerus. So if you're letting that scapula move and the head of the humerus is moving, you're really not working anything, right? Makes sense? Both fixations are moving. So we want to stabilize the scapula and really work on isolating that glenohumeral rotation, and so dissociating the movement of the glenohumeral joint from the movement of the scapula. So main point when we're doing external rotation exercises is to keep the scapula stable. So we don't want to let that shoulder coming fully forward. We're not squeezing the shoulder blade back as we do it. All right? So first exercise that we're going to look at for strengthening, activating, reactivating the rotator cuff is an eccentric band external rotation. So eccentric only means that we're actually going to use, we'll move the bench. We're actually going to use the help of the other arm to do the concentric portion of the lift. So Michael's going to have a seat here. He's going to use the band. I like the open hand so that he can do pure rotation. Now angles here are important. See how his elbow is not right out to his side? He's in the plane of the scapula. So he's in a little bit of horizontal adduction from here. He goes eccentric external rotation, uses the other hand to help for the concentric portion, and just comes nice and slow, decelerating. And keeping that shoulder blade nice and stable. Use the other arm help. Keep that angle 90. Perfect. So this is the kind of exercise that you'll want to do reps that will take you to connection, awareness, activation range, 10 to 12 reps, always quality before quantity. So whenever he feels that he's not able to hold that scapular position anymore, he's letting the shoulder roll forward. In any instances where there would be pain, the set would stop there, okay? Second exercise, better exercise to train the rotator cuff. One muscle that we often forget with the rotator cuff is the subscapularis, which is one of the four muscles of the rotator cuff, but it's actually an internal rotator. It's the biggest and strongest muscle of the rotator cuff, and it has a super important role in stabilization because as you lift the arm overhead, it will pull the head of the humerus forward and down. So it will prevent a lot of that head of the humerus coming up into the subacromial space. So subscapularis is often neglected because if you work into external rotation, you're not going to hit the subscapularis, it's an internal rotator. So to work the subscapularis, we're going to use a similar exercise. We're going to switch the bench around because now Michael's going to have to work into internal rotation. Same idea with regards to the scapula is we're going to work in the plane of the scapula. So we want to make sure that elbow is not right out to the side in line with the shoulder, but 20, 30 degrees in from the frontal plane. Good. And from there, he rotates in and back out. In. So same idea with the shoulder. He's keeping that fixated and see how it's just true glenohumeral rotation. Nothing else is moving. He's really dissociating movement of the scapula from movement at the glenohumeral joint. Back. Good. Same concept as the previous exercise. 3 sets, 10 to 12 reps, good enough to get good activation of that subscapularis, and ideally follow that up with more specific shoulder stability exercises that will really work on strengthening that rotator cuff in its stabilization role. So again, nothing wrong with your external rotation rotator cuff exercises, but key points to keep in mind is that there are better ways to do them and that letting the shoulder blade move is not gonna isolate those rotator cuff muscles. We need to keep that shoulder blade fixed. So remember that scapular movement dictates glenohumeral movement. So if we're letting the scapula move, we may actually irritate the rotator cuff further by doing external rotation exercises.